On Friday, we finished, the last final data was gathered in our US MDMA post-traumatic stress disorder study. It was a tremendous, tremendous accomplishment. It took us, since 1984 is when I started trying to work on MDMA psychotherapy research. It took till 2004 to get the study started, so it was 20 years to get it started. It took a while after that to get all the money, get it together. So it was $1 million, 4.5 years, and now we have incredible data. We haven't hurt anybody in the study, no serious adverse events, and we have results that are better than anything the pharmaceutical company can do by 300%, and we have data that's in some people better than what psychotherapy can do as well, because we're only working with treatment failures. People have had to fail on psychotherapy and also pharmacotherapy. So we have now basically set the stage for the next 10 years. I used to talk about a $5 million 5-year plan. And I talked about that for probably 10 years. And I'm now speaking about a $10 million 10-year plan. But that's based on a more realistic assessment of what our challenges are ahead. We're much farther along, we have a lot of data. So I think realistically, if someone were to write me a check for $10 million right now, in 10 years I could give them back approval for MDMA as a prescription medicine. Not just in the United States, but in Europe as well. I do think that that's realistic. Now, Monday of last week, we also got word from the FDA that they had accepted completely our Swiss LSD end-of-life anxiety study protocol. So all of our foreign studies we submit to the FDA. And the basic idea here is that we're going to do a series of studies in the United States and a series in Europe, Israel, and the Middle East. And then we cross-submit to the European Medicines Agency and the FDA. So we will hopefully simultaneously get approved in the United States and Europe. So the fact that the FDA has now accepted LSD-assisted psychotherapy is a major, major milestone. That is the culmination of this first phase of the psychedelic renaissance. LSD as the most controversial drug, and LSD as a tool for psychotherapy. The FDA has also accepted a study which has now started in the United States using LSD for understanding creativity and brain function. So LSD is in scientific hands again. And as Winston Churchill said about one phase of World War II, he said, after a particular victory, he said, this is not the beginning of the end, but it is the end of the beginning. And I think that's where we are with psychedelic research. We are at the end of the beginning, we have this chance, and we have to look carefully, how do we avoid the backlash, and how do we offer hope to the society so that they're letting us to go forward. And there's a publisher, Jeremy Tarcher, who sent me, also on Monday, the same day I heard from the FDA about the LSD study, he sent me in the mail, it was a document, he'd been going through his files, and it was a signed copy by Timothy Leary of a letter that he wrote in 1960 to Aldous Huxley. And it was the attempt, Aldous was over at MIT, he was at Harvard, it was an attempt to bring these two groups together. Aldous, who studied, who'd written about psychedelics in the 50s, who was very interested. So it brought me in mind of this particular letter. I've done a lot of research into Timothy Leary and Harvard and what happened and what went right, what went wrong. And there's a document that I'm going to read you some from that was written in October 1961. And it was by David McClelland, who was a professor at Harvard in the School of Social Psychology, and he was starting to get nervous about what Tim Leary was doing and what this psilocybin project was up to. And there was a big faculty meeting that was going to gather to talk about what was going on. And these are his notes. And as I read them today, there's things that I think we really need to be paying attention to in our efforts over the next decade or 2 decades to really further do this mainstreaming of psychedelics into our culture. So what he's describing is what he thinks are the sort of flaws in thinking of this psilocybin project. And the first one, he says, is he thinks about psychedelics in terms of sort of mystics who go meditate on mountains and withdraw from society. And so he trashes the whole Indian society as poverty, squalor, and meanwhile you got these people who are just going off on their own selfish pursuits up into the mountaintops and meditating. And so he says that he's really concerned that psychedelics produce or have a tendency to produce disassociation and detachment. The way he describes this is, quote, "From the subjective point of view, this appears apparently largely as a gain. From the social point of view, it has many negative features. Initiates begin to show a certain blandness or superiority or feeling of being above and beyond the normal world of social reality. They feel sorry for those who have not had the experience. Social rules, roles, and regulations seem remote and slightly ridiculous. Everything is a game. All is illusion, even self. In other words, the inner world of fantasy," so he's not really giving it much credibility, but the inner world of fantasy is valued more than the outer world of social reality. So we know that around this time too, Tim was starting to talk about everything as a game and how he was starting to feel that this scientific process that he was involved in was too constricting. And I think that things would have been a whole lot different if he would have found a way to stay within this scientific context. But we know how history turned out. Now, the second part he talks about is what he calls interpersonal insensitivity. And so we've heard about the mystical experience, the sense of connection. And so what David McClellan is saying is, as a hypothesis, I would suggest that the feeling of sensitivity is in fact an undifferentiated sensitivity in which one feels a kinship to all human beings, not the unique personality showing marked individual differences. In other words, differential sensitivity is decreased by psilocybin, while the feeling of cosmic oneness is increased. So he's saying that people are really starting to get alienated from this psilocybin project, and he's saying that Leary's talking all about this cosmic togetherness, but he's not paying attention to the community in which he's existing right at the time. Then he says there's omniscience, religious, and philosophical naivete. What appears to be going on here is a recreation of the childhood faith in the omnipotence of thought without the discipline, again, of testing these thoughts against the reality of religious, philosophical, and social traditions. So I think that what really he's pointing to here is the need to bring science and religion together and to really subject what we experience in psychedelic states to logic and to rational thought, and that they're not inherently opposed to each other, but that if you get sort of what's been ridiculed in a way as New Age thinking, New Age, without any kind of reality checking, that's what he saw starting to be happening here. Then he talks about impulsivity, and he says the history of, now impulsivity is also like focusing on the moment. So we talk a lot about how psychedelics bring us into the moment. But what David says is the history of the project has been marred by repeated ingestions of the drug, group decisions made which are not carried out. One can hardly fail to infer that one effect of the drug is to decrease responsibility or increase impulsivity or acting on the spur of the moment in terms of one's subjective field at the time. Again, note the increased valuation put on immediate subjective experience. It is in these terms that the failure to foresee negative consequences mentioned above can perhaps be understood. One becomes present, not future-oriented. So I think this is a really, really important point. It's not just like this Dionysian license to do whatever you want to do, that there does need to be a focus and a spontaneity, but you also still have to recognize how you're acting within a cultural context. And if we avoid these different mistakes, we have a chance of integrating. But if we really don't pay attention to the lessons of the past, and to summarize, how to prevent disruptive modes of thought, perhaps especially among those who administer it, since they take it too, and quote, how to prevent the absorption in one's own thought processes from creating social withdrawal, insensitivity, impulsivity, and an unrealistic sense of omniscience. So